All right, we're back, and I'm going to talk about psychopathology in emerging adulthood. I was just talking about emotional distress in the last segment, and when we look at the rates of people who express that they are experiencing psychological distress, you'll see that the 18 to 25-year-old bar is by and large the highest bar. Like the highest risk of psychological distress occurs that will occur in adulthood occurs in emerging adulthood. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of changes going on in a person's life when they are between 18 and 25. They're probably making big decisions that might impact the rest of their lives. They may be moving out of their parents' home. They might be moving to a whole new place, or traveling, or you meeting new people, having adult relationships for the first time without sort of for lack of a better word, chaperones around. There's a lot of things that are going on. They might be having their first jobs that can be very stressful for a person, and that can contribute to psychological distress. Now, when we talk about psychopathology, we're talking about like diagnosable disorders, and psychological distress is not a diagnosis. So I thought I'd share with you some age-related psychological disorders graphs. So what you see here for mood disorders, they've broken it down by men and women's. You'll notice that across all the ages, women are more likely than men to have a mood disorder. Mood disorders include major depression, but also can include bipolar disorder, so where you've got mania and depression. So you'll notice that the mood disorders have taken a big leap from adolescence to young adulthood. There's a big step up. But this is one case where young adulthood or emerging adulthood is not the prime time for mood disorders. They actually increase towards middle adulthood, and then they ultimately start to taper off in older adulthood. So mood disorders are one case where it's definitely like going to be a change for a lot of the people who are suffering from a mood disorder in emerging adulthood, because they weren't experiencing this prior to emerging adulthood. So it's going to be a big shock, but it's probably not, the last time that these people who are depicted in the 20 to 34-year-old range in this graph, they may be, still included in the 35 to 44-year-old bars, but some additional people will get piled on. So it's like emerging adulthood is definitely a change, but it's not the last change that people could potentially end up with mood disorders. We see the same kind of pattern with anxiety disorders. A lot of us talk about young adults having so much anxiety these days. And, I don't have the data yet on any changes that may have occurred thanks to COVID and stuff like that. I don't have that data yet. But I did a little study. And I say little study, it was winter of 2021. So we were in the depths of the pandemic. All the college students that we surveyed were still having to attend class. They were having to attend class as an online only option. There was no other option. So we administered a survey and discovered that the younger respondents on the survey were experiencing more distress in that quarter than the older adults. So even though you see that anxiety disorders increase with age, and they peak really in the 35 to 44-year-old range and then start to decline, even though you're seeing that on that graph, I think there might be some differences in coming for us. We'll start to see some differences thanks to the effects of COVID. But historically, young adults are a little less anxious than older adults. I think in part because as we get older, we know more and more things that can go wrong. And so I think it makes older adults a little bit more, and they have more responsibilities for other people, and that can make them anxious too. And then our last panel I wanted to share with you was eating disorders. And you'll notice that the 15 to 19-year-old period is the peak time for eating disorders for females. Males, the peak was just a little bit younger. But so that's partly encompassing emerging adulthood, right? The 18 and 19-year-olds would be in part in that bar. But then it comes down again between the 20 and 24-year-old range. You see the bars starting to come down, and then across lifespan it tends to go down. But so you can kind of see that there are, the development of some psychological issues going on in emerging adulthood. The good news is that for most emerging adults, while they are sort of branching out in these new ways and experiencing new things and whatever, this is a period of time when they have their most stable social support. They tend to report having the most friends of their lifetime happen during this emerging adult period. And we're going to talk about this more when we get to social development, but I think it's relevant to psychopathology because young adults may be experiencing fewer mood disorders than they could have if they didn't have the support of their family or their friends or whatever entities they're tied in with, right? They might have more anxiety if they weren't feeling supported, right? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that we can buffer some of the impacts of, environmental triggers for psychological disorders through social support. So that's actually really good news. Now, this diathesis stress model argues that for the development of psychopathology, there's probably some component that is a genetic predisposition and that has to combine with stressful life events that will then lead to the emergence of the psychological disorder. So under this model, if you had a person who's growing up in a completely stress-free environment, which I don't know what that is, but let's pretend like that world exists. So if you're being reared in this completely stress-free environment, that even if you had a genetic predisposition, you probably wouldn't develop a psychological disorder. On the flip side, if you were growing up in a very stressful situation, but you do not have the genetic predisposition for a psychological disorder, you won't develop one. No matter how stressful the environment is, you will come out fine. The problem with this idea is that it's kind of hard to ever parse out the role of genes and the role of stressful events because as we've understood the genome more and more, we're finding more and more genes that are tied to psychological disorders, and they're on lots of different chromosomes. They're kind of distributed here and there across our genome. And so probably most of us have a predisposition to develop some kind of psychological disorder. And then, like I laughingly said, I mean, honestly, what world is full of, whose world does not contain stress? I mean, that doesn't even seem like they weren't even trying when they made up this model, because really probably everybody has some kind of predisposition and everybody has some degree of stress in their lives. So I would just like to argue with the diathesis stress model that they've kind of left out, potential modifiers, the buffering effects of support, the buffering effects of coping strategies. These kinds of things. I think they kind of left that out and, forgot that probably most of us do have a genetic predisposition and most of us do have stress. And most of us probably do have at least some symptoms of some psychological disorders. And I include myself in that list. So this model has been one that we've really operated from across time with psychology as far as trying to explain psychological disorders. Well, it's a combination of genes and stress and stuff like that. But we're now starting to build on it and really talk about, what factors can make us resilient to, the development of a psychological disorder, even in the face of stressful life events, and even if we have a genetic predisposition. All right, let's talk about this physical issue, this biological issue, exercise. A lack of fitness when we're between the ages of 18 and 25 is associated with 4 times risk of diabetes by the time we reach age 40. So when we look at this chart and see that the percent of people who are not physically active is lowest during the young adulthood period, this emerging adulthood period, most of the people in this age bracket are physically active. If you flip this over, it looks like about 33% are not physically active. So that means 2/3 are. Now that last third probably should be exercising a little bit more because this is the peak fitness time. This is when you're setting up the patterns that will help to determine how your body, responds, for homeostasis, and as senescence kicks in, you want to set it up for success. So 18 to 24-year-olds who engage in physical activity are going to reduce the likelihood that by the time they're age 40, they could be diagnosed with diabetes. Speaking of which, weight management. So, as strange as it is to believe in the world, there are people who are trying to gain weight. If you are one of them, you're like, how's that strange? But for the most of us, we're worried about losing weight. But for those of you who are trying to gain weight, this is a really important message for you also. Our bodies, because of their tendency to maintain homeostasis, have sorry if you can hear my dog barking. Someone must be delivering something. So, because of homeostasis, our bodies develop something called a set point, which is a weight that you can maintain very consistently. You might overeat sometimes or undereat other times, but it really doesn't significantly affect your weight because your body establishes homeostasis. So that set point typically happens pretty naturally. You'll have a set point, but you can also kind of affect it sometimes through sort of working on your metabolism. So for most of us, our metabolism is a function of how much we exercise, how much we eat, so that even at rest, a person who exercises more tends to burn more calories. By the way, if you think a lot, that burns a lot of calories. Your brain consumes a lot of calories. So thinking a lot will really boost your metabolism. Exercising boosts your metabolism. Eating certain kinds of foods, like ones that are high in fiber, are going to boost your metabolism because your body has to work harder to process them. So metabolism is the thing that kind of maintains your set point. So let's imagine that a person has their set point, everything's healthy and fine, but they decide, oh, I'm going to be a bridesmaid in my friend's wedding, so I want to lose some weight so I look good in the pictures. And so they go on a diet and they lose some weight. Interestingly, when they go back to their normal eating, their body doesn't say, well, I'll just go back to where I was. The body says, I just experienced a famine and it could come again. I better hold on to extra just in case. And so the set point's just a little higher than it was before. These are silhouettes, so they kind of had to make it look more. But so now when the person goes, oh my gosh, I weigh more than I did when I started, I'm going to lose some weight. First off, it's way harder to get down to where they had gotten the last time. They can maybe get close, but not all the way back down because their body's like, no, this is that famine I was looking for. I am not releasing my fat. After you relax again and your new set point gets established, it's going to be even heavier than it was before. So one of the problems with just dieting it off is that your body will keep adjusting the set point to prevent that famine from depleting the stores again. So that's why exercise plus diet is such an important strategy when a person's trying to lose weight. You really have to sort of change everything about what you're doing if you really want to change your set point. And it probably takes months to change your set point and convince your body that, no, really, this is the new amount that I'm going to be moving. This is the new amount that I'm going to be eating. So please let go of this fat. And then it's less likely that it'll immediately pop back on plus more if you are to backslide a little bit, maybe eat stuff that you're not supposed to eat or something like that. If you've heard about this new diet program called Noom, Noom, I see it on the TV all the time. It's based supposedly on psychological principles. It's taking the perspective that basically you're not going to diet it off through some kind of crazy behaviors. You have to change your lifestyle in order to change your set point. So that's why weight management is so tricky. But it's, again, if you're a young person listening to me and you already don't have a weight problem or anything like that, that's great. And the only thing I can tell you is to keep exercising and eating well, even if right now you don't eat well and you're burning it off. As you're entering emerging adulthood, you definitely want to eat well and exercise so that you don't start to gain weight and then have to lose it, because it's way harder to lose. You don't even notice it coming on, and then you're like, oh no, and then it's like impossible to lose it, it feels like. So that's my best advice to those of you who are young and haven't started gaining weight yet. The average person from turning 18 on gains on average 1 pound a year. So do the math. In 50 years, you're going to weigh 50 more pounds than you do at 18, right? If you don't do anything else about it. So diet and exercise, healthy, nutritious diet with exercise that will get your metabolism up is the solution, and starting young. All right, let's go ahead and take a break here, and I will pick up with risk taking.